Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone can hear us, and thank you very much for joining us today. We are here to talk about the role of CFOs in businesses, when you should hire a CFO, what you should pay them, what you should be able to expect from them, etc., etc. And today on the panel, we have John, Arish, Kat, Cleo, and Alex. John has previously worked in upper tier finance roles, 14 plus years with a variety of experience in TfL and Thomas Cook. He was also CFO of a tech recycling startup, and he's now formed a company called Addition with one of his former colleagues, Graham Davis, who outsource finance services to 180 SME businesses. Arish is a founder of EmergeOne, a consultancy providing CFO support to venture-backed startups and scale-ups, and also founder of Projected, a modeling and decision-making platform for founders. Kat, who is joining us imminently, has a background in finance, having studied economics, including financial accounting at Harvard, and worked across investment banking. Kat has been at Albion VC the last 4 years, where she focuses and specializes in investing on B2B software and digital health from seed through to Series B. Cleo is a partner at Stride VC and a personal investor in more than 60 startups and ex-director of ops at Uber. And Alex is CFO at Gopher and has been a CFO of a range of businesses, bringing experience from large corporates to SMEs in a relevant and practical way to help them scale and grow efficiently. So now it's time for me to hand over to our panel. We've had quite a few preeminent, Kat's just joined us. We've had quite a few preeminent questions from the audience so far, and hopefully with the 4 questions we have planned, we should address most of these. And Patrick will be moderating the questions in the background, and we'll spend 15 minutes at the end answering those and the most relevant ones of those where we can. So the first question for the panel in an open discussion style situation is, what role should a CFO take in a startup, and what value should they be adding? When do you know how to hire those individuals, and what should you be asking them to do? John, do you want to take that one first, because you're first on my screen?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, thanks for the intro, and great to be here, Joe. I mean, from my perspective, having been a CFO and also now a fractional CFO, for me the biggest thing is cash flow forecasting. When you're starting, just raising money, working out what your run rate is, how much you've got to deliver those goals that you put out when you raise the money, is the key thing that a CFO finance person can bring to the table. Working out how to divide that money up that you've raised, and ensuring that the various teams or people within your startup are delivering what they say they're going to deliver for the investment that you've got, and keeping on top of that, reprioritizing, and basically being that cold person that's looking at it analytically rather than looking at it with their heart, or most of the decisions with their head. So that's the key role I think that a CFO can bring to a startup.
Anyone else on that?
Cleo, what do you think from your perspective as an investor?
I think if we're talking about the really early stages of a company, then it might not be necessarily like a chief level type role, right? But maybe early on, you just want somebody who's able to make sure all your books are straight, using the right systems and software, setting up the initial processes, and like doing month-end closes in a very sort of tight manner. That's really just setting up the basics, right? And then obviously working with the rest of the executive team on figuring out the investment plan, like you said, like, based on the company's priorities in the next 6-12 months, like how should the budget be allocated, and then making sure that there is a healthy sort of check-in sort of dynamic and process around that. And I'm sure this would evolve a lot over time and over the years as the company raises more money. But initially, that's what I think of it.
Just firing it across to Alex and Arish, from your experience, do you think it's, I guess, unreasonable for founders to expect everything in the kitchen sink? Can you have affordable services who can do modeling and the strategic bit and help you through due diligence, and also expect them to do accounts payable and accounts receivable, in kind of in their spare time, for want of a better phrase? Alex, you're on mute.
Oh, great. So I think you've muted me there. I couldn't unmute it. From my perspective, actually, the CFO should have probably a broader remit. I think CFOs in startups really should be almost jack of all trades, not just focusing on finance. I think actually they can bring a lot more to the picture. So in my experience, legal tends to be within the CFO's remit. So legal, HR, possibly IT. I think what a really good CFO can bring is actually that broad spectrum. So not just your dry finance type tasks, but actually really adding commercial value to a business. There's a certain amount of risk, a certain amount of compliance avoidance. So, making sure that every, contracts are in place. They're really good contracts. They're worth the paper that are written on. That for all employees, we have proper agreements. And it's just basically putting things in place for the next stage of funding so that there are no skeletons in the closet. So when they kick the tires, people won't say, look, this is wrong. So actually, I think as well as just looking at the numbers and the cash flow and doing monthly accounts, I think the CFO can really help across the board in adding value and bringing sort of experience that really should just be helping, working with the founder to grow the business and get the business ready for the next stage.
Arish, your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in here. So I think you kind of, I would agree with what Alex said there. I think you need to kind of take a step back, and as Cleo said, it really kind of depends on the stage of the business. So I don't believe there is no unicorn CFO that wants to do strategic work or can do strategic work and is also willing to do. It may happen for a couple of weeks or a month or so, but you don't buy a Ferrari and then get to plow your fields, as it were. So first thing I would say is, like, at the very early stages of the business, what you probably need is someone operational in the business that can, as Cleo said, get all of that kind of process and business as usual finance ops in place and do that right. Often because founders don't necessarily have understanding of finance, what will happen, I'll call that person a CFO and expect them to be able to do kind of all of those roles. But a truly good CFO, a great CFO, earns that title through experience rather than qualification, if I can put it that way, right? Just because you have an FCA or ACCA or an FCMA behind your name doesn't necessarily mean that you have the capability or the experience, especially when you're working with early stage or growth ventures, because the dynamic is very different. So where I would agree with Alex absolutely is that CFOs in early stage businesses and growth businesses tend to be kind of a catch-all for almost like a quasi COO role, and there is often inflation between those two roles. I think at very early stages, what you need from a CFO type person is quite light touch, sort of board advisory kind of remit, such that you're getting the value of their experience without necessarily the cost, because CFOs don't come cheap. So I would actually, I think you have to be very, very clear that at early stages of the businesses, you absolutely do need that strategic advisory, but you don't need it all the time. You don't have enough capital, don't have enough people, you don't have enough, quite frankly, revenue or even sort of growth potential yet, to need a CFO that is spending 3 days in your business trying to figure out stuff. So what you really need is someone that can do your operations from a finance perspective, and then probably a CFO dipping in and out as and when required. As you scale, you get past Series A, Series B, potentially that's when you need the full-time kind of CFO support. So, and in between that, you obviously have portfolio CFOs as well. So you may start off with some very light touch advisory, followed by portfolio part-time CFO, and move to full-time as you scale up. But yeah, to answer your kind of original question, there is no, in my opinion, unicorn CFO that loves doing bookkeeping as well as figuring out where you raise money and how much you should raise.
I think for me as well, for scale ups, it's quite important. For many founders, owners, this is their baby, and they're not actually used to handing over control or getting advice from people on board sometimes. And I've had experience in a couple of startups where I wasn't allowed to look at invoices because the founder thought that was still his remit. And similarly, some founders might think, actually hiring a CFO, why am I paying so much? This person is just going to pay the bills, issue invoices, and do payroll. What else are they doing? And they don't quite understand the value that a CFO can bring, a really good CFO. And it's not just a management accountant, someone who can produce the books. And I think sometimes there's the emotive issue from founders, and there's almost like an education piece as to where CFOs can really add value, not just, we signed off 20 invoices today, happy days.
And Alex, that's exactly why Addition was born, because I'm totally with you guys. I don't think there is that unicorn CFO, as you've called it, that wants to and can do everything. So we built up our business by being able to support with each of those different pillars. So you've got the right people associated with the right job, and you just use them for that fractional basis, rather than having to employ a bookkeeper, someone who could do your payroll, someone who could review your contracts, someone who could be strategic. You can dip in and out and dial in, dial off when you need those people. And I think that's what a lot of early stage companies need. We support over 100 of those very early stage that are pre-revenue, and then the rest of our companies have all started to move into being profitable. And those early stage ones, they just need all the books aligned so they can rely on the financials and they can create a plan. But it's all about ops, marketing, and the tech development that's the main people they need early on, not the finance person. So I totally agree with you guys.
Just expanding on that, and from my experience as well, maybe from an investor point of view, Kat and Cleo can answer. People not cut them soon enough when they're not doing what they need them to do. People churn in finance, people get a bit nervous about, particularly if it's taken a while for somebody to get familiar with the business. So just over to you guys on what you think the biggest mistakes are that founders could make and how they could avoid them.
You cut out a little bit there for me, but that was probably my side. But I did hear kind of biggest mistakes. I think to the point which everyone's been making is hiring an operational CFO and then expecting them to be really doing a lot more than is reasonable, and therefore letting go of having a handle of the numbers yourself. I think at the earlier stages, pre-Series A, quite often see founders or management teams coming to present and actually not having a full grasp of their numbers and then trying to hand that off. At that sort of stage, that's sort of not acceptable and reflects really, really poorly. So pre-Series A, I'd say that's one of the big ones. And I think, as already sort of alluded to, is like post-Series A or approaching Series B, quite often people don't realize how big of an impact a CFO can actually have on a business. Like quite often that CFO becomes, one of the absolute key people. I've seen people when they've raised their Series B, Series C, Series D, like give some of their secondary to the CFO just to be like, you are a true business partner to me, completely on their own accord, given how much impact they've had. So they are the two sort of at the early stage and the later stage that I see the most, not being on top of it at the beginning and then not realizing or appreciating early enough how important that CFO can be later on.
Yeah,
do you echo that?
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, do you echo those thoughts?
Yeah, I think so. Aligned as well. And just sometimes when maybe startups are hiring their first finance leader, they're not really clear on the skill sets and functional sort of spikes that they're looking for. Maybe this company is like really keen on exploring M&A, for example, but not hiring for that skill set, or hiring someone who's not got an accounting background, for example. It's actually not everyone has all of those, right? So yeah, not hiring for the right skill sets. Another one I've seen is actually maybe this is more transitioning from Series A to B, where the finance leaders start to become more and more strategic and critical, is maybe the founders are not always used to empowering them and letting go of control, and actually empowering the CFO to make decisions and constantly overriding some of those decisions, like for example, spend decisions, and not prioritizing with them as well, in terms of making sure that they've got the right strategic priorities laid out for finance. So those are maybe the other mistakes that I might add.
I think that's
Sorry, go on, Kat.
I was just gonna say, I think that's a really interesting point in kind of like not listening. I think quite often, you know, again, just after people are still, you know, it's still very founder focused business if you found your business, and you're the one setting the vision, and quite often you've been having to do a bit of everything. Whereas in reality, there's a million tools probably still in the business with the proliferation of SaaS and how much data is coming in, even at the really early stages. And as the founder, as a CEO, you probably don't have a handle on all of that, but it's sort of the CFO's responsibility these days to, you know, have visibility of all of that. So they quite often have to be the voice of reason, I guess, to the exec team quite early on. And they have the most holistic, probably, and data-driven view of the entire business. And sometimes it's sort of then on them to kind of bring the rational view or have the least biased view when you're having these more strategic conversations, and oftentimes that might not land well. So opening up to kind of their perspective can, I think, be quite helpful, but understandably tricky at the super early stages.
I think that's completely true in my experience. A lot of the founders, especially perhaps if they've just received Series A, think, you know, happy days, everyone loves my business, I'm on a complete roll, and, you know, right, we've got this check, let's spend. But actually, the winding them back, the thinking, you know, is this going to get the business going forward, or perhaps being the bearer of negative news, to the point earlier about cash flow. You know, I think once the initial funding's in the bank, people think that's it, they're set up for life. But actually, the scaling profile and the ambitions of the founders sometimes don't quite coincide with the cash in the bank. And sometimes it's a reality check that, you know, this needs to happen by this time. Otherwise, you know, the company's going to, you know, have some tough decisions. And I think some founders can take that a bit personally, and seeing that you're attacking them emotionally and it's their baby, you're saying that you've got an ugly baby. And I think sometimes founders might need to be sort of led to believe that, you know, step back, we're all grown-ups now, it's a company, it's not necessarily their baby anymore.
One of the things I have a podcast, and I have some great guests on them. One's an operator named Jelaine Chan. She said something really important, which is processes aren't. And I always thought early stages you kind of throw process to the wind, because you're just experimenting, you're doing as much as possible, as quickly as possible, and that sort of that kind of process driven approach is anathema. But the reality is processes allow scale, right? So they actually assist businesses to be able to experiment rapidly, because you know the boundaries in which you can experiment, how you're going to experiment. And I think one of the things that is very difficult, if you're an early stage founder and you've never had, and I think this is very important, never had experience operating a business or a startup or a scale up, and we're all talking about venture-backed businesses, I think, for the most part here, as opposed to, you know, more traditional small businesses, you know, you are scaling very quickly, and if you don't have some relevant processes in place, you're going to break very quickly as well. To your point, Alex, around cash allocation and making sure you don't spend the money before, you know, just because you got the cash in the bank, you know, it doesn't mean that you've got everything sorted. I think again is the real. There's this whole kind of, I think, desperation almost once the money lands, because, you know, fundraising can be a 3-6 month process. we've got to go out and spend it. But the business has moved on from when you first started raising the money, right? Because your metrics 3 months ago or 6 months ago are very different from your metrics today. What you need in the business today is different from what you needed then. So it's always about taking that step back and analyzing and understanding, what the business needs today to take itself forward. And the point that Kat, that you made, I think is so, I mean, it's actually both, it's in one part frustrating, but one part very telling. Finance and CFOs in particular have become the catch-all for data, right? So we now are not just about, so I was about it in terms of previously finance was about looking inwards and backwards. Great CFOs look outwards and forwards. What does that mean? We're testing, sniffing the air, testing the waters about what's going on outside the business and how we can grow, rather than looking at our numbers from a finance perspective. Certainly management accounts which are a month or a quarter out of date. You're looking at the data in real time, and you've got to figure out how to efficiently communicate that data to your internal stakeholders as well as your external, because remember, CFOs are also talking to the board, to investors about the progress of the business. And I think this is the thing, CFOs are almost late stage co-founders in the business, right? I often talk about as being first gray hair into a lot of the businesses that we work with. Why? Because we've had the experience, we understand those growing pains and how to turn those growing pains into structured growth. So I think, yeah, all of those points are just like, they hit home very, very, very clearly.
Okay, so we may have covered this next question anecdotally along the way, but at what stage do you need to hire a finance leader, and kind of what should that look like? And if we have answered it, then please just tell me and we'll skip it. But just to make it a bit more explicit, what kind of person should people be looking for, I guess, and why?
Can I just quickly jump in on that one? The answer is it depends. It depends on your business. It depends on certain trigger points. It depends on, are you raising money? Have you just raised money? Are you doing some M&A work? Are you post-revenue? Are you pre-revenue? There is no one size fits all. We often get approached by pre-revenue ventures that have just raised a ton of capital, and they're like, we don't know what to do. Like, not that they don't know what to do, but how do we best allocate that capital, right? We were approached by a Series B business that's scaling 2x month on month, doing close to $1 million in GMV every month, does not have a single finance person in-house in the business. Like, that is crazy, right? Going into Series B in February. So I think the earlier the better is what I always say, because it's not about hiring, it's about getting the skill set into the business as early as you can, and then you scale up accordingly. I don't think it's ever too early to have someone who understands finance in your business. But in terms of a CFO, there are certain trigger points, and those are, as I say, fundraising, M&A, you're growing, you're doing a secondary, you're doing some stuff that is not just traditional kind of bookkeeping. You're trying to figure out, your pricing or internationalization, all of those sort of things. Those are trigger points. You need a CFO type person, at least in your business.
So I have a question to follow on from that, and it might be an honest one, particularly against a CFO like John, Alex, and I used to be, or still are rather. Given that if you hire a CFO at a particular stage of the business, how will a founder know when the CFO has been outgrown in terms of their skill set and ability? Should it be the responsibility of the CFO to put their hands up and say, actually, I haven't got experience in this, or should the founder be looking for particular things or particular markers or triggers that give them the inclination that actually that CFO isn't suitable for a Series B, and that conversation needs to be had? Because that's very different, right? Different people for different stages, as we've been saying so far.
I think, Joe, let me just come in on that very quickly. But I think it's really important to create that honest, open relationship as a CFO with whoever the founders and the other management team. When you're in an early stage business, you haven't been there and done it. You're forging something new, and very likely you all haven't been there before. So you should be open and honest with each other about what your capabilities are. And I think one of the things that maybe we haven't mentioned so far that a CFO can bring to the table is an incredible network of people. So that to me is something that yeah, I can hold my hand up and say, hey, I'm really struggling here. I don't know how to do that, but I know some people that can help, and you can bring in the relevant people. I think a finance person generally, one of their characteristics are that they're honest and truthful. And I think that's what you should look for as a founder when you're trying to hire a CFO, is someone that you can actually rely on, and they will hold their hand up and say, you know what, I don't know here, I need some support, but I actually know the support and where to go for. And I guess to answer your question directly, when that CFO or that finance person says, I don't know what to do, that's probably the time immediately that you need to start looking elsewhere for more support.
I'd agree with that entirely, but I would add, I think one of the hardest parts about being a CEO is hiring and more importantly, firing people. A lot of people really struggle to learn how to do that, and understandably. But it's really on their shoulders to recognize when actually things aren't up to scratch. You know, sometimes there'll be really obvious signs, such as your metrics are breaking, or you don't have basic analyses that investors are asking for when you're fundraising, or you can't articulate what your key KPIs are, and you've got enough going on in the business that actually these things begin to matter. That's sort of an obvious sign. The other thing I would add, which I've seen several times, is that also sometimes it's just not a fit anymore, and it's just everyone can see that the CFO is not enjoying their job anymore, because quite frankly, there's very different skills and very different role expectations throughout these stages. And a lot of CFOs actually prefer to be involved in the earlier stage, whereas a lot prefer to be involved in the late stage. So quite often you'll just have a mutual recognition that they don't enjoy their job anymore, and then you don't have some of the stuff that you need as a founder. And therefore it can be quite an organic and natural time to make a change. And the final thing that I would add to that is, I think, you know, it used to be pretty common for a CFO to sort of sit in a role for maybe 5 or so years, kind of finger in the air a little bit there. But increasingly we see them there for just 18 months, because companies are scaling to A to C in the 18 months, or raising, you know, $100 million Series A's or something ridiculous. And as a result of that, I think, you know, one of the things to your question before about mistakes people make, which I probably should have said at the time, is that quite often you see people trying to hire for someone who can be there and optimizing for sort of 5 years or so. That doesn't really work anymore with these compressed timeframes, and so the expectation sort of from the get-go these days should increasingly, at least in my view, be higher for 2 years. So your expectations are better aligned. So, you know, the person that you're hiring has that expectation, and you have that expectations. And obviously amazing if that person grows beyond that and they are the right person for Series A, Series B, Series C and beyond. It's perhaps more unlikely, but not impossible. But as long as those expectations are set up front, then that should make the journey quite a lot easier.
I think what you've said there, actually, I'm just reading some of the questions as well. I know I'm just going to jump in anecdotally with this one. Someone has asked, in a fast scaling business, should we intend to hire a CFO for 1, 3 or 5 years, and will that affect their level of commitment? I'll answer that first, because, you know, I've been a fractional FD, CFO, financial controller now for about 4 or 5 years. And I've always treated any role, whether it's 3 months, 1 month, 1 week, as though I'm a full-time employee. You know, if the job needs to be done and you need to go in on a Saturday or a Sunday or something, or somebody expects something by Monday morning, my opinion is you give the same level of commitment to that business as though you had equity. You know, that's, in my opinion, gaining trust in a finance role is harder than any other position. So you have to do that with commitment, integrity, and honesty and deliverables, particularly, you know, very early in the stage of working with those people. If you're seeing individuals that demonstrate signs of different levels of commitment, whether or not you're going to give them some options, or whether you're saying they're going to be there for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, it's probably not the right person. Nobody knows what's going to happen in 5 years. You know, you could have bereavements and everything else, so people can't give you an answer that they can definitely commit to be with you for the next round of investments, whether it's a Series B or whether it's fast growing, because they don't know their skill set, and you don't know what the requirements are going to be at that particular time.
Yeah, I'd agree with you know, all of that too. Sorry, just to just to jump in here. I mean, for any role in a fast-growing startup, I would generally advise hiring for somebody who'd be comfortable in the role today, but be stretched in 18 to 24 months time in terms of their capabilities and how you see the role growing. And so I feel like that also applies to finance. And that kind of aligns well with the general fundraising cycles as well, right? Or whenever you now expect to see step changes in the size or scale of an organization. And I think it's really on both parties, but definitely on the CEO and the leadership to like just be very transparent and call things out and have conversations where things are not going well. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone if a change needs to be made. So Arish, you're going to say something?
Yeah, no, so I think it goes both ways, right? So alignment comes when you are enjoying the work you're doing, believe in the mission, believe in where the business is going, and it doesn't matter whether you're a CFO or any other employee in a business, right? Certainly in a startup or in a scale-up. Like, so in most corporates, it doesn't really matter as much if you believe in the mission. Often you're doing it for other reasons. In a startup, I think it's really important that you believe in the mission and you believe in where the business is going. I slightly disagree with what you said, Joe, in terms of like, should you say if there aren't options on the table or whatever. Let's face it, working with startups and scale-ups is risky, right? You're often working more hours than you would in a traditional role. You're often working for less cash compensation than you would necessarily in another role, and certainly with more uncertainty. So I think there needs to be alignment there. In terms of when is the right time to move on, it'll become super obvious, right? Either, and we always say, like, we're doing our role well as part-time portfolio CFOs when we make ourselves redundant from the business, because it means that we've allowed the business to scale to the extent that they need someone full-time there. When we go out and we talk to businesses, we have very clear kind of understanding of who the right CFO for that business is. We don't put, just to give you an example, marketplace CFO into a medtech venture that's scaling at Series A or Series B. Why don't we do that? Because we know that the dynamics for business are going to be different from a marketplace to a medtech business. There will be certain peculiarities, and that will be the same in terms of stage, whether it's seed or Series A or Series B or something else. There are also, and I can't remember, I think Cleo, either you or Kat made this point, right? There are certain types of people that prefer the rough and tumble of early stage, really kind of nitty gritty, down in the dirt, trying to figure stuff out, really kind of moving quickly, versus stability, growth, like scaling something on a with a regular kind of plan and process in place. And there are different people that are suited to those different types of roles. So it's always about looking for round pegs, round holes. Stop, what I say to founders all the time is, yeah, you hired someone, you call them an FD, but you call them an FD or you call them CFO because they had a finance qualification. That doesn't mean that is the right person, right? So you've got to look beyond the qualification. You've got to look at the experience. You've got to look at the alignment, and both parties. And I think CFOs, to your point, John, are very honest and very truthful, have that integrity where they're going to say, you know what, I'm not the right person for this role right now. I'm literally going through that process with two of my clients where I've said, you know what, this is no longer right for you. You need to have a different structure in place. And it's just about having that open conversation because, like I said, gray hair in the business. We're not here to take a paycheck. It's about doing what's right for the business and helping the business scale. And sometimes that means getting out of the business's way.
I think those points can also be applied across the board of the leadership team of scale-ups, so not just within finance, but a lot of people who start off in smaller tech businesses enjoy that sort of cut and thrust and drive, and actually as they scale up and things become a bit more corporate almost, they don't enjoy it so much. So I think there's a natural evolution in the leadership team across the board, not just finance.
You just on mute, Joe, I think.
My bad, thanks, mate. I think that then leads on to the next question and a preconceived idea, and to a certain extent, it is true that you pay what you get for, or sorry, you get what you pay for. I can't speak today, and and ultimately, these things don't have to cost, and they shouldn't cost 1,500, 1,200 pounds a day, right? There needs to be a sensible price between what you actually need, and then this goes back to figuring out what you need in the first place, and also, you know, what you're willing to pay for. At a latter stage, yes, it will cost more, but in the earlier stages, do you need to pay that if you're still pre-revenue and if you're in an ops kind of stage? So, general roundtable one on what we think on pricing.
That's a really loaded question, because, well, first I will say, you pay peanuts, you will get monkeys, right? Like CFOs, good CFOs are likely to have gone through several kind of iterations and cycles of working with businesses. I often say to people, the value isn't in my time. The value is, to John's point, in my network and my knowledge. I could do more damage or provide more value with a 30-minute phone call than I can in 3 weeks, possibly, right? So I think you've got to separate out those two things. So you're paying for value, not for time. I think that's the first thing. For sure, like there is a cost that a startup can't support, right? Because it's cash limited, right? Like it has limited runway, it has limited capital. But that doesn't mean that is the day rate 1,500, is that right? It's if you're paying £1,500 a day for a good CFO and they're giving you half a day's worth of work, then you're paying effectively £600, £600 or £750 for that half a day of work. Then that may be okay. It's what the business needs. What I would say is, I have perennially found anyone who's hiring a CFO at sub and who's charging themselves out at sub, I would say £700, are probably very, very beginner stage CFOs, or haven't had the experience, or, and this does happen, but I don't see it as, are comfortable enough that they believe in the vision and the mission enough that they're willing to kind of make a sacrifice in their rate. And that's talking day rate. And when you're talking full time, what I typically say is, good quality controllers are anywhere between 60 and 80 grand. Good quality on a full-time basis. Good quality FDs are anywhere between 80 and 100, and good quality FOs are kind of 100 upwards, but typically 120 to 150 in early stage or growth ventures. And then it depends on kind of equity comp and the other kind of benefits that come with the business. But yeah, I do absolutely think you do get what you pay for.
I found that very interesting conversation in terms of the value. For me, a CFO should always pay for themselves as well. Like, they should be looking for either the unit economics of the business. How can we make this more profitable, at least at a gross profit level? How can we cut some costs out? Maybe instead of outsourcing some of the legal stuff, I can do it at bringing in a HR person. We can do that internally rather than outsourcing that, for example. So I think that whatever price that you pay for them, they should be bringing you that back at least, if not a couple of times over. But yeah, I agree with you, Arish, in terms of the cost there, in terms of what they are from a full-time basis. And I think it's really difficult when you're a startup to be able to afford that, which is why the fractional basis is used so popularly. Or you can start to give a lot of equity. In the roles I've had in the past, I was given equity in the startups, and you're given quite a significant chunk when you're a CFO, and that's a good way of trying to level up the compensation, and like you said, get someone that's involved in the mission of the business and actually get them involved in the future success of it as well. But yeah, the costs aren't cheap, and that's why I think going on a fractional basis and using them when you need them is really where you have to go.
So just going on to that, I have had a question, but I'm going to caveat this with, this is a protected characteristic. Is there such a thing as age being relevant when looking for a good CFO? I know it's a protected characteristic, so we can't really answer the question, but how do we determine whether or not the experience of an individual is pertinent to how many years they've necessarily been a finance person, for example. So just because they've been doing finance for 40 years, does that make them more experienced in a particular position than perhaps someone who's been doing it for 5?
I think it's about relevant experience. It's not about the time that you've been doing it. I mean, you could have a CFO who's been doing the job for 40 years, but actually if it's a completely different sector, and if it's been a very stable business, that's completely different from a tech fast scale up. So for me, a blanket age brush isn't appropriate, because one has to look at the right experience and also what the person can bring to the role. If they're just, they probably wouldn't like a fast moving business if they don't have that relevant experience, and vice versa. Somebody, if they like fast scaling businesses regardless of their age, you need to have the job that suits the right person's credentials, characteristics, and generally experience regardless of age.
I think it comes down massively to fit as well, cultural fit. So if you've already got that team in place, maybe you're a couple of founders and you're looking for your first or second senior hire, it has to be the right cultural fit. So like Joe was saying, if you have to work on a weekend, or you have to work late into the evening, or you want to do things socially together, you can really start to make significant progress when you're actually a team that gets on. But yeah, I think as long as the person has got relevant experience, I don't necessarily think there's necessarily an age, but I would say that it would be good that someone's actually been through at least, and has an understanding of what you're doing. It's not that they've just read it in books. They've actually been there, and they've either worked with a failing company, which I've done. You learn the most in a business that's failing and running out of cash. You learn what not to do, which is the best life lesson I think you can have. But they've also been there in maybe something that's fast growing, so that they can bring that experience and bring that network to the table. So while there might not be an age, I think at least having on their, let's call it their proverbial CV, that they've actually done things that you can see can add value to your business.
And actually, to echo John's point, I think a really important point, which you can't really put on a CV, is just, do you get on with each other? It's likely that the founder and CFO will spend a lot of time working together, probably, more than they've envisaged. It won't just be a 9 to 5, it'll be traveling for business, it'll be late night going over decks and packs and models and traveling and lots of other stuff. So it helps a lot if you get on. You could be the best person in the world, but actually if cultures clash, it will be hugely difficult. So I think when picking a good CFO, pick someone that you think you can get on with and, go for a drink with. I think it helps everyone.
I think that's a really important point in terms of the interview process as well. If this isn't one of a friend or a recommendation, actually really taking the time to interview and spend time with them in different environments. It doesn't have to be in an office style interview. Have a drink, have it over dinner, do it in informal, make them give some examples of what value they can bring. Because like you said, Alex, you have to get on, have to.
So just going to elaborate on that point slightly, and the market at the moment is very candidate driven. There's a lot of VC and PE money out there. There's a lot of CFOs in demand, and there's quite a lot of demand for resource. How important is it from a VC perspective and a business perspective that a CFO has specific sector experience? There's a lot of transferable skills in finance, but how much do you think it's valuable that they must have done tech, or they must have done ad tech or med tech or something along those lines specifically relevant to that business?
I think it depends on the business vertical as well. I think most skills transfer across, as you say, but whether or not that person is a good, both a culture fit, but also work pace is a big thing. Pace sort of fit. I find that maybe the experience in the specific vertical might matter more in regulation heavy areas or sectors where you can't just go in and operate like any other business. So those might require more specific expertise, or just things are more like technical, right? Like maybe businesses that are heavier on a couple of areas like balance sheet requirements, like really capital intensive startups versus like a SaaS business. Like I think maybe having specific skill sets or experience related to like debt financing, for example, could be helpful for those types of companies. Otherwise, it also probably depends more on what the business needs to do than what the vertical actually is.
I'd agree with that too. I think I agree with all the points so far. I'm kind of first and foremost hiring for cultural fit, and then obviously it can be sector dependent. But I think, you know, the cultural fit and the fit, as we spoke about before, that doesn't just mean like you'd want to hang out with them or they pass the kind of airplane test or you get a beer with them. There's loads of other things that come into that. It's probably easiest to kind of contextualize this with some examples. So when we think about sort of hiring at the strategic CFO post Series A or approaching Series B or whenever it might be, whenever it fits the company best, there are also different types of strategic CFOs based on their experience, based on the company, and based most often on the profile of the existing team that's in place. So to bring that to life with a couple of examples really briefly, one might be, we did a 20 million Series A with a business alongside a couple of big banks. So they're selling into banks, they've got banks on the cap table, and you can kind of take from that very high level the sort of DNA of the business. And the founders of that business were extremely technical, so clearly would benefit, they felt, as much as us, from having a kind of proven sitting CFO who seasoned finance lead, who'd been there, done that, venture-backed business, seen a company scale and go through an exit, new SaaS metrics, knew how to build a finance team, and they're in very short supply and they're very expensive. But that was the best fit for them, and I'm sure more than pay for it himself. In another example, a similar business also raised a Series A, slightly smaller Series A, I think it was 10 million or so. They had a different view of the world. They're still trying to get someone who was super strategic, but, you know, and management were extremely technical as well, technical for co-founders, but they were a little bit more commercial themselves. So they could afford to maybe compromise a little bit on some of those things, and hired what kind of we kind of called with the recruiters that we're working with the kind of high potential step up CFO. So that person hadn't done all the other stuff that I just described, but they usually would come out of a kind of one of the big four accountancy firms. They'd done sort of an operational kind of seniorish FD role in a smaller business, so had their first step up, but now we're looking to step up and run the whole finance function, and that cost then a little bit less. But the management team's own personalities and skill sets and what they could also bring to the table and where they needed help fit with that. So even though we just say kind of strategic CFO and an operational CFO doing this and this, there's actually also kind of levels between that, and that completely depends on the skill set around the table and what you actually need in your sector, your stage, your business, and the personality types. And that's, I think, where the fit comes in. These are two post-Series A businesses scaling at a similar rate and pace, but actually could afford to compromise, pay slightly different levels as a result, and get different skill sets in as a result.
I think it also depends on the rest of the leadership team. So within the teams, you need to look at sort of where the strengths, where the weaknesses are, and optimize the diversity in terms of different people bring different things. So you may have another leadership member or a COO who is very strategic, in which case you might not need a CFO who's very strategic. You might need a more technical CFO. So I think it's looking at the whole leadership team, what everyone can bring, and potentially where the gaps are. So it's not just someone to crunch numbers and get you to Series B.
So I've got another pretty good question from somebody in the audience, and I've got my own opinion on this, but I might save this for last this time. Is it possible to hire a CFO from a Big Four practice who have got gleaming qualifications in academia straight into a fast-growing startup?
I'm going to take this. It's possible, but you're going to get burnt, is quite frankly my opinion. No, I mean, it's like this whole conversation we've said, relevant experience, understands startups, cultural fit, gets what they're doing. It is a very different proposition to come from a business which has thousands of employees, a machine behind it. You're completely sort of removed from collecting cash from a customer in order to make sure that you can make payroll this month. you know, dealing with Clio and Fred at Stride and trying to negotiate a term sheet, and then going and trying to horse trade with Cat. Like, I mean, these are skills that you don't get sitting in Deloitte or PwC necessarily. And testament to that is that all of them have had growth kind of practices that they're all dismantling because they just can't do them. So yeah, go for it. Like, you know what, actually, it makes me very happy when people do that, because I know I'm going to have work down the track, because we'll be able to fill those gaps. I've had it time and time again. People who look absolutely spiffy on paper because you look, Deloitte Finance, they must be the right guy or the right gal, but actually, geez, they end up taking the business into a hole. They don't know, you know, they don't know what they should be looking at in terms of levers. They're kind of sat back, their hands off. They don't know how to, you know, they don't know how to produce the numbers that are required. They don't know what metrics are required. I had one guy, like, I won't kid you here, PwC, the guy was running this startup's finances on a spreadsheet, and it was a $500,000 GMV business. I mean, it wasn't massive, but he was running it on a spreadsheet. And I was sat there, you know, I came in and I was just dumbfounded, honestly. And he argued that Xero was not an appropriate tool. Like that. Anyway, I mean, like, I feel very passionate about this. Yes, you can. No, you shouldn't.
My background is I am one of those ex-PwC people, and to be honest, you come out, you're qualified, and you think, I know everything. I am amazing. I've got a certificate that says so. You know absolutely jack shit. You have very, very little operational experience. You're brought in to look at the numbers, which are very, very controlled. You don't really see things that go wrong. You may be technically, financially very good, and you know how to do things. But when it comes to, fuck, how do we fix it? Or, oh, there is no cash. How do we get cash? What are our investors going to say? You don't really have a clue. You're used to managing people. You're used to wearing what used to be a nice shiny suit. And but I think when it comes to the real hard graft of running a business, you don't know. So I would advise anyone who comes out of Big Four accountancy firms is to really learn about running businesses and what they need and what a good CFO needs, because it's very different from what's presented when you're in a Big Four. And everyone pulls the wool over the Big Four people's eyes as well. You know, you don't tell them the full truth. So get out there, get into the real, get some experience.
I'm also Big Four backed, and I agree with the comments. The only thing I would say is there are departments in there. I worked in corporate restructuring where we would take over failing businesses. So I've run a nightclub business and actually had to go and do all the cash collections, had to put on the acts, had to work out how to negotiate with the beer and the other alcohol providers. So like, actually, I did have to do all of that stuff. And when you're a junior person, you get incredible experience. So I definitely wouldn't employ someone that worked 3, 4, 5 years in the Big Four and put them straight in as an FD in a startup. But I would look at the different skills and the different roles that they might have undertaken in the Big Four, especially if they'd worked in restructuring, definitely not in the consulting or tax or auditing spectrum, but definitely in restructuring, I think is a great breeding ground and gives them a great stepping stone into it. But they'd have to go and have done something else and worked within a smaller business, and then I would consider. But yeah, I'm not quite as passionate as you, Arish, but I know exactly where you're coming from.
We've got about 4 minutes left. Don't think I've got any other questions unless I've missed any, but if we have them, the audience, please drop them through to us directly afterwards. Any closing speeches from anybody?
Sure. From my perspective, I think when you're starting out and maybe you've just got your seed money, or you're going through that next stage, I don't think you need CFO, FD, finance person in-house. I think you can definitely outsource that to someone, and they can start doing that for you on a fractional basis for the elements that you need. The key roles you need are the operations role, the tech role, and the marketing role, actually testing your product and getting out there. But as Clio and Kat both mentioned, like when you're standing in front of people and wanting to raise significant amounts of funds, having someone that's with you as a finance person in the room with you is probably the best thing. And that to me is the checkpoint of when you should actually start bringing that role from outsource to insource, probably when you're, I don't know what the correct terms are, but around series A, around that level for me.
I slightly disagree there. In that I think, yeah, I agree that fractional or portfolio or part-time works better at earlier stages for sure. Like that I'm fully on board with. I think you always need someone within the business that understands the finance. And the reason for that is they need to be close enough to the business. There are a lot of fractional, and I haven't used Addition in the past, so you guys may be slightly different, but I have used a number of outsource providers in the past, and they're just not close enough to the business to understand actually what the business needs. And the reason we, as an example, have our portfolio CFOs go into the business and sit with the founders is because that's how you learn what the business needs. So yes, at early stages, portfolio fractional definitely makes sense. You definitely need people that can do the operational side, but you equally need someone that can understand the strategic. They just don't need to be full time. As you scale, you need people that understand your business intimately, can provide the numbers internally and externally, and that can help you, as we've all said, scale the business efficiently. And that may mean, and without putting Clio and Cat out of a job, looking for non-dilutive finance instead of venture capital, as an example, right? So there are lots and lots of benefits and value that a strategic CFO can bring, but they can only bring that benefit and strategic value, I think, if the operational side of finance is being taken care of. So I think it's really important to have those two in balance.
So just want to say thank you very much to John, Clio, Alex, Arish, and Kat today for joining us and giving us their thoughts and having a passionate discussion on why not to hire Big Four. The only time Arish showed any passion in the conversation. And thank you very much for everybody that joined us. If you've got any questions, please drop them through and we'll be happy to answer them.
Thanks. Have a
Thank
great
you,
day.
everybody.
Great. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.